Ammo is a critical component for any action pistol game you get into. In this video, I go over everything you need to know about choosing competition ammo. Now, ammo can be a fairly straightforward process, or it can be very complex depending on what you want to tune it to or what your preferences are. Now, due to YouTube policies, I'm not going to dive into loading ammo specifically, but I am going to go over all the key decisions you're going to need to make in order to choose ammo. So, all the ammo I discuss in this video is readily attainable from a manufacturer. Now, the first question we have to ask ourselves is, what dictates what ammo we should choose? Now, I've defined 4 criteria that we should think about. Number 1 is the organization/division that you want to choose. Secondly is understanding power factor. Third is performance. And fourth will be reliability. Now, we're going to dive into the organizations and divisions. I'm going to keep it very brief to 2 organizations, which is USPSA and IDPA, because if you understand how they determine the rules for determining power factor and the viability of what ammo you decide to use, understanding these rules will sort of translate into other organizations. So starting with USPSA, I want to keep this simple and focus on its scoring, which is either major or minor scoring. So in major scoring, you're going to get the better scoring of that, and that's going to be a higher power factor. In short, you're going to have bigger bullets with higher velocities. Now, that's really relegated to 2 divisions and where that makes sense and is competitive, which is limited and open. Now, let's say that you don't make power factor for whatever reason, especially at 165. You drop down to minor scoring, which is where a majority of the other divisions hang out, such as production, carry optics, limited optics. And if you don't make major scoring power factor, you're going to be dumped into limited minor and open minor. But at that point, you can compete and you're going to be scored on a minor curve. Let's say that you don't make minor power factor. Well, at that point, you're going to bump down to a non-scorable match scores. Let's talk about the big thing to pay attention to in USPSA, which is certified match ammo. To keep that simple, USPSA has developed a set criteria for both quality and saying, hey, this type of ammo should make power factor. And it's a fairly rigorous process in which they take a good size sampling from a manufacturer and it consistently has to meet standard and make power factor. Now, a lot of those companies kind of lean on the conservative side when they develop this type of ammo, which ends up being around 130 up to 133 power factor. So if you end up purchasing certified match ammo, you're going to have to declare it at registration. And at that time, you're going to have to give them 8 rounds out of your box, as well as fill out paperwork declaring you have certified match ammo. Now, as you're going through this match later on, you're going to have to, again, submit it like regular chrono, which you surrender somewhere between 6 and 10 rounds of ammunition. Now, for whatever reason, let's say during the match that ammunition doesn't make power factor. That's when they'll reach and grab that original batch that you gave them and compare it against that and try to see if that's within 10 power factors. So there is a little bit of room for forgiveness. Now, the question becomes is if you can in fact be disqualified or become non-scorable, what is the benefit? Well, a lot of the manufacturers actually make it easy to ship ammo if you're doing like a major match, which is huge because shipping can get expensive. And in doing so, that shipping can be anywhere from very low to free. And so when you factor in the cost per round and the fact that you don't have to worry about shipping, it ends up being about the same as what you can pick up some reloaded ammo for. So it's actually a good deal. Now, switching along to IDPA. IDPA's complexity comes in the divisions you decide to go with rather than looking at minor or major. So I'm not going to get into detail of each nuance, but I am going to leave details to a link on my website that has all those power factors labeled out and is relevant as of this video, which was filmed in Q2 of 2024, because they can in fact change. But the bottom line is there are certain divisions that carry over in terms of power factor, such as major scoring, which you would see maybe single stack in USPSA, is also custom defense pistol in IDPA at a power factor of 165. Now, other like divisions would be carry optics, enhanced service pistol, which is limited minor, and also standard service pistol, which is just production in USPSA. Those all carry the same power factor floor of 125. I just gave a brief overview, but if you can tell that I've hung on quite a bit to the term power factor. So what is power factor? The calculation is fairly simple. You take the bullet weight and you multiply that times the velocity, which is in feet per second. Now, once you've got that large number, you divide it by 1,000, and that is your power factor. Now, to give you an example, 147 grain, which is the most common 9mm, you're going to take that and multiply it by a velocity of 851 feet per second. That gives you just a legal amount of 125.1, which if you've listened before, that puts you right at minor scoring. So how do we measure bullet weight and velocity? Bullet weight is simple. At the time of chrono, what you'll see them do is they will extract the bullet from the actual round that you've developed, and they will weigh that. And then they will measure the velocity by actually shooting one of your rounds. And how they measure that is with a chronograph. Now, this is the one I actually use and is becoming more popular at most matches, which is a Garmin Sero C1 Pro. Now, I may have miscued that, but I will leave a link in the description if you're interested in one of these. But you need those two items in order to actually determine power factor. There are other variables you need to consider. Big one being location and temperature. Now, one thing I've learned is if the closer you are to sea level, the faster your bullet will tend to travel. Now, what that means is if you're developing a load, let's say in one of those areas, you can go to another area and your ammo may not actually make power factor because it may be slower. So you want to kind of pay attention to your location relative to sea level. The other portion of this is temperature. In hot, extreme hot or cold temperatures, you can have variances that bounce your ammunition around. So if a barrel is not quite up to heat because it's cold outside, it can in fact actually shoot quicker, as I've learned, which a lot of times moves to your advantage. Whereas it's hot outside, it can actually come out a little bit slower, what I've seen in some matches. Now, the other one is the type of bullet and cases that you have. So if you're using reloads, depending on how they actually do them, you can see ones that are uneven, kind of like this round I'm showing you here, or you can have a factory new one, which is straight, and all the density factors are still nice and even because it hasn't been expanded or a lot of heat applied to it. Now, what that means is this round that's been used before and is inconsistent in how it's crimped and put in can create a very wide variance. When I tested this with 147 Super Veil against Syntech 150, the variance was 20 feet per second with the Super Veil versus the brand new Syntech 150 with only a variance of 5. So that's huge because when you go to chronograph and you think, hey, wait a minute, I'd like to be here and, I want to feel confident that I'm not going to have such a wide variance. Well, of those 8 rounds, let's say 7 out of 8 of them you pull are slow because they're on the lower side of the load. That could be something to pay attention to, which is why you see a lot of these manufacturers load them conservatively to keep them higher in the power factor range. Now, one other factor is barrel length. So this is a 5-inch barrel, and I will say that versus this gun, which is a P365 AXG Legion, which only has about a 3.1-inch barrel, there is a massive difference in velocity. The reason for that is in the 5-inch gun, you have the full length of the barrel to travel and build up velocity in there. Whereas this setup terminates much earlier. So in short, you're gonna have different velocities depending on the type of round. To give you an example, out of the AXG Legion with the shorter barrel, the average velocity was 1,083. Whereas with the DS9, it was approaching 1,197. So it's important to pay attention to the barrel length, and particularly the takeaway is your gun. With ports, you tend to lose a little velocity, especially if it hasn't hit terminal velocity within the charge that it has. And a good example of that is for fun, I used the Syntec 150, and the power factor was about the same between the two. And that has everything to say that before it hits the ports here and the gas exits, that charge has already hit terminal velocity somewhere inside that barrel before the ports have happened. Now, when I use a hotter load, such as 115s, that's when you'll see a difference in power factor. Now, in this case, it wasn't too bad of a drop, and I would have to attribute that to the quality of the barrels, but what that equated to was about a 10 to 20 feet per second drop. So if you're making power factor barely, that's something to pay attention to. And the one final thing I want to add on is if you have both a short barrel and ports, that's something to really take note. If you remember in my Zev OZ9 comp video that I did previously, the reason why I didn't want to move forward with that gun in competition further is I had to buy really hot rounds in order to make power factor specifically in carry optics. Now we're going to dive into the performance discussion of this. Now, if you like that video, please hit that like button as that helps me a lot. And you're going to want to subscribe because I have plenty of content on how you can be a successful shooter with gear and as well as plenty of reviews. Now, when we think performance means a variety of things. That can boil down to, for us, is either accuracy as well as the general shooting characteristics. So for example, if I'm running, let's say, minor, I may like to use a 147 grain bullet with a lower charge. The preference comes in where I like my shooting characteristic, which is in this case, it'll actually feel a bit softer on the initial recoil impulse. Now that's nice when you're shooting a lighter gun or even a smaller gun, which a lot of guns are starting to kind of lean towards this day and age with the 4 and 4.5 inch evolution out there. Now there's the other side of this is where you can have something a little snappier. I actually practice a lot with this type of ammo, which is typically a 115 grain factory round. Now the beauty in this type of ammo is it's the most accessible ammo in the 9mm range, and almost all of it makes power factor through virtually every gun out there. So accessibility and cost make it ideal. And when you have something snappy, it's actually getting you well prepped to not only appreciate maybe softer ammo in those settings, but it actually conditions you to see how quickly a dot or your sights can travel. So there's a lot of benefit to it. Now for me, on a heavier gun, I actually prefer 115. So a heavier gun for me is going to be a gun that has a heavier slide and maybe a little bit longer barrel. 115 tends to give it a little bit of muzzle rise, so I can track the dot a little quicker, and also return to zero is actually about the same for me. Now I touched earlier on some of the discrepancies between new and reloaded ammo. What that introduces in performance is that at distance, let's say that you're trying to shoot a 25-yard head target, your disbursement accuracy at that type of range can disperse just a touch wider. Now what that can mean for you is the difference between a hit and a miss, or a alpha or Charlie. Now that doesn't negate that you could make something with reloads fairly close to actually factory new. Like a good example of that is this black dot ammunition where they roll size the cases on it. Now that doesn't necessarily mean, hey, this is going to change the density of anything, but you're going to have a much more even disbursement of when that case expands and lets that projectile out, that it's going to be consistent. So when you're talking reloads and buying them from a supplier, there are differences in quality that you should pay attention to. Now I want to move into reliability. Reliability starts with the manufacturer first. Now, funny story is many rounds as I've shot, which is well over 100,000, I have only ever had one squib. And that was with brand new factory ammo. Because guess what? Those rounds can sometimes be made on a Monday, and I happened to get one and not pay attention because I assumed it was new, that it was up to quality standard, especially it being certified USPSA match ammo. But I happened to get a batch that was made on a bad day, and since then I've paid attention to those. Reliability can be affected. In one gun, such as my Glock 45 can fire nearly anything, whereas it may be in a higher tolerance gun such as my DS9s that will actually choke it. So what you want to end up doing in those cases is buying a good solid case gauge such as this one, and when you're serious about your matches, you'll probably end up putting these all through here just to make sure they fit the case gauge. The thing to pay attention to is if you have a tighter tolerance gun, you're just going to want to invest in quality, seeing as how you already probably paid the premium for those tolerances to begin with. Now I want to finish this video with a few simple takeaways. Number one, always chrono your ammo to whatever gun you decide that you're going to use. Because believe it or not, same guns or anything like that can cause different outcomes. And finally, you're going to want to case gauge all your ammo. I pretty much stick to it with big matches, but it's also a good habit to case gauge all your ammo so you are in good practice and you can spot what bad ammo looks like. So with that said, guys, we will see you at the range.